Hello everyone, and welcome to week 7 of NMP 621, Introduction to Philanthropy and Fundraising Fundamentals. This week we are going to spend the whole week discussing the very important topic of ethics and philanthropy. We are very close to the end of our 8-week session about philanthropy and fundraising. And ethics is so important to the profession that we spend an entire week on it. The ethical practice of philanthropy directly relates to your job in the nonprofit sector, whether you are a fundraiser or whether you are an executive director or another senior level manager in the nonprofit sector. The ethical practice of philanthropy is very, very important to you and to the organization. We'll start with the discussion of philanthropy is moral discourse and this quote from Robert Peyton. Many of you will remember reading in the James Hodges chapter on major gifts that to engage a prospective major donor is to engage in a moral and ethical dialogue. Also, you'll see in Kim Gattel, who is a major gift officer in Chapter 18, the notion that successful solicitation results in a gift that is the culmination of the donor's search for meaning. So once again, there is that discussion of philanthropy as moral discourse. In other words, our role as a fundraiser is to engage the donor's moral imagination. In other words, to engage the donor's vision of what the world should be and what it can be through their philanthropy. So let's return to this Robert Peyton quote from 1988. He wrote, "It is the function of philanthropy as moral discourse to point out the gaps between the ideal and the actual, whether it be in terms of civil rights, the claims of the poor and the defenseless, or the protection of the natural environment." End quote. And he goes on to write that this requires imagination, and that we have to see suffering and need, recognize it for what it is, and engage our moral sentiment. As you see in the quote here, that is on the PowerPoint slide, it is within the philanthropic tradition that the moral agenda of society is put forward. Many people probably do this all the time in informal, small, local, grassroots types of ways, but it is the job of the fundraiser to engage the moral imagination of donors. So let's talk a little bit about what are ethics. And here on the slide you see 3 very different definitions. The study of standards of right and wrong behavior, that from the Institute for Global Ethics in 1997. And then we see the quote from Sir Thomas Aquinas, who was an Italian philosopher and theologian, and his definition is rooted in the law. Law, an ordinance of reason for the common good made by him who has care of the community. And then we conclude with the quote from Gene Temple, that philanthropy is ethics is actions that meet the expectations of your constituents. His is a more practical definition of the ethics of philanthropy. So you might recall in the first week of this course we looked at various definitions of philanthropy. While various definitions exist and scholars have differing opinions on the emphasis, at the core of philanthropy is an intersection of private goods being used for public benefit. So therefore, you could say that philanthropy is inherently an ethical action. The questions that you see here are the basic ethical questions about philanthropy that pertain to us as not only as individual givers, but also as fundraisers. Why should I give? How should I give? To whom or for what should I give? And what should I give? Aristotle has put forward a way for us to answer these questions. Generosity, he says, is the mean between extravagance or excess and stinginess or the deficiency of giving. He believed that virtuous giving was giving to the right people, the right amount, at the right time. And in this way, giving is actually a pretty challenging task. The giver must know a lot about the potential recipient and his needs. So how we answer these questions and the way that we give individually become expressions of our own personal values and ethics. So now let's take a moment to consider why ethics are so very important to our roles as fundraisers and nonprofit professionals, really any nonprofit manager. As we've talked about, or as you talked about in NMP 600, those of you who took that course, building the public trust in the nonprofit sector is critical to the long-term sustainability of the sector. And as we all know, there are some nonprofits who have given the whole sector a bad name, as it were. The nonprofit sector is not free from fraud, unfortunately, and fraud that happens in this sector is often sensationalized in the media, which causes a further decline in the public trust for the sector as a whole. So that's why it's so critically important about this notion of upholding the moral nature of our work. And that is why the emphasis that we must hold ourselves as nonprofit professionals, we must hold ourselves to a higher standard. Here you see the statement of ethical beliefs as put forth by the independent sector. This is freely available on the independent sector website. The transparency and the accountability within the nonprofit sector, as we've discussed and as you've learned in other courses, is so critical. But now we're looking at it from the perspective of the donor. How do these practices of accountability and transparency, how do they play out from the donor's side of the conversation? And you begin to see very soon how important it is for organizations who are donative in nature. In other words, organizations that receive a high percentage of their resources from philanthropy rather than from government contracts, that it's maintaining the trust of their donors is critical to their very survival. Just to return to a moment to the independent sector, on their website you can find their article on Principles for Good Governance and Ethical Practice, a guide for charities and foundations. It was developed by the panel on the nonprofit sector, and it outlines 33 principles of sound practice related to legal compliance and public disclosure, effective governance, financial oversight, and responsible fundraising. These principles are important because they help organizations assess and improve their operations. Organizations that have applied the principles report an increased capacity to achieve their missions, including improved governance, stronger organizational cultures and practices, and increased credibility with funders, individual donors, and community partners. So let's take a little bit look at the ethics of giving. The Josephson Institute of Ethics have put forth these 4 ethics standards of ethics of giving in making ethical decisions: respect, fairness, accountability, and finally openness and honesty. These are the values to put forward as fundraisers as they relate to the ethics of asking. Honesty, promise keeping, in other words, that the gift is used for the intended purpose, loyalty, and accountability. So I want you to think a little bit about how this relates to your profession as a fundraiser or a nonprofit leader. Fundraisers both engage in moral and ethical dialogue with potential donors, and they must adhere to the highest ethical principles in their work. Ethics in fundraising is complex, as all of our readings this week will lay out for you, and a number of useful tools for resolving ethical issues are described in this Making Ethical Decisions text. We've also talked about the importance of language and how important it is for the dignity of the nonprofit profession and fundraising philanthropy in particular to use appropriate positive language. It's not only dignity for the profession, but it's also is respect for the donors themselves, so that you are not begging, and rather you are inviting the donors to share in an opportunity to support a cause that is important to them. Occasionally, as nonprofit professionals and fundraisers, you may find yourselves dealing with an issue of tainted money, and that is when the source of the donated funds are in direct contradiction with the organization's mission. And one of the discussion forums this week will ask you to respond to a specific case example and how you would respond. In other words, what would you do in such an ethical dilemma? We're also going to be taking a look at the Donor Bill of Rights. This document, along with other various standards, for example, the AFP, Association for Fundraising Professionals, Code of Ethics, and others, we will be taking a look at this week. But the Donor Bill of Rights has really stood the test of time. It was created at a time when fundraising really wasn't considered a profession at all, and it created standards for the profession and thereby legitimized the profession, elevated it, and the profession gained respect because of these 10 principles listed in the Donor Bill of Rights. It assured donors that their gifts were going to be used as intended and that the fundraising profession was paying attention to ethical standards. So we return to the moral nature of philanthropy with this quote by Richard Gunderman in 2008. Philanthropy is concerned no more with transfers of wealth than with the cultivation of human potential. Philanthropy is no more about finance than about soul craft. In fact, the philanthropist is first and foremost a cultivator of souls. And we think that this quote really exemplifies the best of philanthropy, that it is critical and important work, and I'd like you to think about it this week, particularly through this lens, that it's not just about the money, that it is very meaningful work. So we're going to leave you at the end of this week with this cartoon, which presents in a humorous way the whole notion of honesty. Which is at the basis of all of our ethical discussions. Again, this is week 7. We're close, very close to the end of the week. It's a lighter week for you. There are only 3 discussion questions this week and no writing assignment. So I hope that you will take this time to do good preparation work for the written final, which will be due at the end of week 8. That module is already open and the instructions for the final are already published for you. Take a look, please. And if you have any questions, please ask them early. Don't wait until the end, the middle or the end of week 8 to ask your questions. This is a complex assignment, a 2-part assignment, and I've given you no writing assignment this week so that you can make good preparations and do a really good job on your final. Also, I'd like you all please to review either with the APA manual or on the APA website the rules for APA formatting, particularly in-text citations. From week to week, I've noticed that in the writing assignments there have been some issues with the APA formatting, and this will be critically important for you moving forward because in the final analysis, your capstone projects will require APA citation and formatting, and that will be critical to your success in your capstone project. So that's it for the remarks for this week. I look forward to hearing from you in the discussion forums, and thanks for listening. See you next week.